Okay, and welcome to chapter 2. Now, this is notable because we've got a 10-year gap from what happens in chapter 1, where Harry's being dropped off, to what happens in chapter 2, where we're actually picking up in the very first line. Reads, nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the front step. So the first time we see Harry, he's a baby with a scar who somehow survived Voldemort. Now we're seeing him as a 10-year-old boy who really is just completely mistreated. He's, kind of counted out on mattering in their family. He has no social status as far as they're concerned. They really don't even want their own son associating with him. They treat him differently and they do everything in their power to let Harry know that he is inferior to them. And so I wanted to bring up what comes up in the very first line in chapter 2, which is the number 10. So, so the number 10 is really important here. And this actually acts as another symbol, much like number 4 did in chapter 1. And I don't think anybody was really expecting that. I don't think you were probably expecting number 4 to be so significant, which was also raised in the first line of chapter 1. I don't think that most people would put much thought into the fact that Harry is 10 years old and not 11 or 12 or 9 even. But the number 10 represents the number of man's perfection. So we can look at this in a variety of ways. We can think of it in terms of the numbers of fingers and toes that a man's body has. We can think of this as far as a symbol of authority of righteousness on earth. If you think about the Ten Commandments, it's God's authority over how the earth governs, how people are governed. It symbolizes law, responsibility, and completeness. So there's a wholeness here that's been attained by Harry at this tender age of 10. And if we read into it a little bit more deeply, then if we look at it in spiritual terms, spiritual protection is signified by the number 10, as well as a trust in divine guides. 10 always, it's a round whole number, but it always does symbolize perfection, but yet at the same time, the end of a chaotic period of time. So if 1 is birth and new life, then 0 is chaos and death. And when you put those things together, this is really the pivotal change that Harry is going to encounter in his life. So he's really now old enough to finally be chosen, to really be plucked from obscurity and then enter into this new world, this new realm, where he's going to assume a new identity that he's not even aware of yet. And so it's notable that they placed him here in this house where there's no room in the house that shows that another boy lives in the house along with Dudley, the Dursley's son. So Harry is pretty much invisible. He's invisible at school, he's invisible at home, and life with the Dursleys has really just been one of anonymity. And as we'll see, the fact that he was placed in their household was 100% strategic by Dumbledore himself. And you'll learn later as to why he chose to place him in this home where he would know nothing about his parents or his legacy. So his invisibility is seen because he's sitting on the bed here as shown in this cupboard underneath the steps. So this is his room. This is the only space that they would make for Harry in their home. And this actually brings about yet another number symbol, which again, I don't think anyone was really anticipating, but we see here that Harry, because he lives underneath the steps, is also something very akin to him living in an attic of sorts, just a dark place that's kind of a makeshift space. It's not homey, it's cold, it's maybe damp even, and there are bugs in there. And so we see on page 19, in my book at least, Harry found a pair of socks under his bed, and after pulling a spider off of one of them, put them on. Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them. And so this is where we get the number 8. And also, I would also venture to say, and I didn't put this in the slides, but I would also venture to say the symbol of the spider as well. The thing that I think is notable about Harry being surrounded with spiders and surrounded by spiders all the time whenever he's at home, I think that's significant because spiders are able to create, they're creators. So I think that they're partially representing some creativity here, but also because they can weave their own webs, right? It's almost like you can weave your own destiny, and that's certainly true for Harry. Um, the other thing that's interesting about the fact that there are so many spiders is the number 8, because the number 8 is significant when we talk about perfection. You know, if you turn the number 8 on its side, it's the infinity symbol. And so when we talk about things that are infinite, things that are eternal, now this is adding really a new dimension to this life of normalcy, dreadful normalcy with the Dursleys. And so because he will cross over eventually into another world, he's going to learn that there is a such thing as love that lasts beyond life. So he's going to learn about eternal love, and that's going to be represented by the scar on his forehead. But that's to come very soon. And so there's this other thing going on with Harry that's really peculiar. So we're told gradually in chapter 2 that Harry is just an unusual kid. Stuff that doesn't happen with other kids happens with Harry. And what happens when these things occur? He gets punished for it. So one of the little things is his hair. So he has this kind of like sprightly hair. And the text reads, Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in his class put together. But it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. So the next morning, after he had gotten a haircut from his Aunt Petunia, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. And so this is something that really gets under Aunt Petunia's skin because she can't control who Harry is, but at least she can try to control how he looks. And she really can't, because there's something in him that just resists being controlled. I wanted to make a little note here because I don't know if this occurred to you when you were reading it in the book, but Harry's hair, get it? See what J.K. Rowling did there? Harry, right? His hair kind of grows out of control all over the place, and his name is Harry. So she kind of named him almost, and decided to do a little wordplay upon that trait that he has that makes him stick out and stand out in a crowd just visibly without even him saying anything. I really think that this is representing how he is by nature defying the rigid normalcy and control in the Dursley household. It's just the very fiber of his being cannot conform to what they wish him to be. And then the snake. So in chapter 2, we see that for some reason, he has to be dragged along on Dudley's birthday. And Dudley is busy counting his presents, and he notices that he has 2 less than last year, first world problems. And they end up going to the zoo, which is something that Dudley really wants to do. And then Harry sees a snake. So there's this glass. A glass cage, if you will, that's containing all of these wild animals, including the snake. So Harry has a moment with the snake. They connect, they make eye contact. The snake, sensing Harry's presence, suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked. I love that we know in the beginning of this chapter that Harry is 10 years old. I love that we know that he's surrounded by spiders and that he's not afraid of them, because 8 also represents eternity, infinity, but also perfection. And so at this perfect time in his life, he's connecting with this snake. It winks at him. And so the snake is a significant symbol here. Snakes in the past, and I think I discussed this before with you, but snakes in the past represented life force. They were not necessarily an evil creature, but because of the creation story in the Bible in Genesis, we Christian societies, we have this negative association with snakes, but in many ancient cultures, that wasn't the case at all. And so in ancient cultures, snakes have always been symbols of rebirth, symbols of immortality and healing, because they're able to shed their old skin and have new skin. They represent this everlasting cycle of life, of death and rebirth. And from death comes life, and from life, it goes back to death. And so we see that in this ever revolving circle. This is significant for Harry because he has this moment with the snake where he looks at the snake and then he's able to make the glass disappear and let the snake go free. So this shows some kind of odd connection to snakes and to magic. And so we'll see this, we're seeing this as a foreshadowing to where does Harry really belong? And even in the new world, where does he belong? What part will he play? Chapter 3. So chapter 3 is titled The Letters from No One. There's one major thing happening in this whole chapter, and this will be brief. The idea is that these letters keep coming to invite Harry to go to this special school, and the Dursleys keep hiding the letters from him. And the significance of this entire chapter is dedicated to one stage in the hero's journey, which we talked about with Alice in Wonderland last week, the call. This is the call to Harry to come and to be who he is destined to be. This is the letter that Harry and Harry alone must answer. So Mr. Dursley forbidding him to go to the school is not enough to keep him there, from going there. The letter is the call. Chapter 4, The Keeper of the Keys. So we meet Hagrid up close. Now remember, Hagrid showed up in chapter 1, but we didn't get too much detail about Hagrid. We didn't really get to know him the way that we get to know him in this chapter. This is an up close and personal look at Hagrid with Harry by his side. He shows up in the middle of the storm, no less, to save Harry from not being able to become who he needs to be. And so he's like Harry's fairy godmother in this way. He kind of saves him. He lets him go to the ball. In other words, it's like in Cinderella. He lets him go to the school, and he is strong enough and big enough and intimidating enough to see through that Harry can escape. So he helps Harry to escape a lot in life that's keeping him from his very special destiny. And of course, this has to happen during a storm. I mean, it makes sense for it to happen during a storm. During a storm, there's an upheaval of things. Things are tossed out, turned over, turned upside down. And it also kind of helps with this idea of restoring balance, right? You kind of have to undo things in order to recreate them the way that they're supposed to go. And so that's what we're seeing here. It was a violent storm where he rescued Harry, and so he's saving him from this dreaded normalcy. And then we come to chapter 5, Diagon Alley. Okay, now this is really important because he meets Dudley's doppelganger. That's how I think of Malfoy, as Dudley's doppelganger. He's like the new Dudley, but much, much worse because he's much smarter than Dudley is. He's much craftier than Dudley is, and he actually has social influence and social power. So Malfoy meets Harry and he says, I don't see why first years can't have their own. He's talking about a broom that you can ride. I think I'll bully father into getting me one and I'll smuggle it in somehow. So we get the same kind of level of bullying and privilege that we saw with Dudley. But Dudley was just, so much more slow-witted that it didn't really seem harmful. He was just kind of a big dumb bully. But Malfoy is different. Harry is going to have to really work hard to work around Malfoy. And he's also coming face to face with Malfoy before he meets any of the other kids going to school with him. I think this is important because he's also meeting his adversary, but at the same time, it's like he's looking in the mirror because he doesn't even know who he is yet.